first thing you need to do is open a new project, click on process and name your project appropriately. The name would be inventory tracker, and you give it a description so that other people, who might use this automation are clear about what it's for. So that's good practice. The more descriptive you are, the better. Now go ahead and create. This is a robot that is being made to basically process changes in inventory reports. So the scenario here is that you get, say you have an inventory report this month. It comes in Excel form. Every month you get a new one that may have updates, and updates might mean some stuff has been sold, some new stuff has been purchased. So you get a new report every month, and you basically want to compare the report you have right now in your hand with the one that's coming in the future, looking for certain things such as, has there been a reduction in inventory? Have there been new purchases? How long has the item or all the items in inventory been in stock, and that sort of thing. So we have to build a solution that will basically teach the robot to do that on behalf of a human being and essentially present you with a report of what are the differences. And if you like, even go ahead as far as posting it into your accounting software for you. If there are new entries, you can make them for you. If there are like journals to be posted, you can do that for you. So that's the project folder. And what you want to do is, put a copy of your current report into that folder, and a copy of your future report. We're going to simulate a scenario where we have a report at hand, which is this month's report, which looks something like this. About 12 rows in it. Each item has a different SKU. And then the future report, say the one that comes in next month, will probably be, there'll be some changes in it. Like as you can see, this one has about 24 items in it, and they're different scenarios. So I'm kind of going to delete what the robot has already done and essentially show you how I built this solution so you can practice it on your own. So this is what you might see from the new report. It's going to look just like the old one, except that it has more items on it. All right, so there'll be new purchases and there'll be reductions in inventory that have transpired over the period. And essentially, you're going to teach the robot how to identify those discrepancies and, if you like, flag them, like leave a note. And then also, if an item has been there for over a year, calculate a given impairment charge on it. So when you refresh, you're going to see your new files in there, which you just pasted in. And our task in this video is to basically build the solution. So as you can see, the designer panel is empty, and we're going to start putting in the pieces to build the report, to build the solution. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to use something called a sequence to wrap everything up. And like any good practice, you should name it. And describe what you're talking about by adding an annotation. So now we're going to wrap another sequence in there that, basically defines all the variables we're going to need in this or most of the variables we're going to need to instantiate this process. So the first one is that where's the source of the information that you're going to be using. So you use an assign activity for that, you drag that in, and then you assign a variable. To assign a variable, use Control K. To create a variable, use Control K. When you do that, we're trying to assign. So I guess one way to look at it is that you have to tell it where is the old inventory file located. To do that, click on the file, right click and press Shift at the same time, and then the option to copy as path will appear. You take that will give you the pathway to the file in computer lingo. It's kind of a long deal, but it basically tells the computer to look in that location for this file every time I call this variable called old inventory file. I'm going to need to do that also for the new or incoming inventory file. So Control K to create that. Now it's a variable because at least this second file is going to be changing every month, right? And so you do the same thing. You go to the folder location or file location, I'm sorry, and you click on that once, right click with your finger on the Shift button. You'll see the option to copy as path when you do that. And you paste that there. So that tells again the computer that anytime you say incoming inventory file, it knows that's the location to go to get it. Now we're going to be referring to these variables very often during this attempt to resolve the problem. So we have to make sure that the scope, scope is a good word, of the variable is always wide enough to be accessed from anywhere in the project. If you don't do that adjustment, you will not be able to call on these variables anytime outside this box that says, or anywhere outside this box that says assign initial variables. You will not be able to call on those variables. So that's the purpose of expanding the scope of the variables you just created. So we're opening this file to get the sheet name, which is September 2022. That's the old one. Now the new or incoming inventory, the sheet name is October 2022. There's only one sheet inside, and this is what it contains. Like we said, 24 items of inventory, up from say 12 last month. The question now is, okay, those are the two files, but then what do we want to do with them? So we start telling the robot, this is how you instruct the robot what to do. Okay, so you create a new sequence, name it appropriately, and say, all right, I want you to copy the old inventory file, the Excel worksheet, and move it into the new inventory workbook. Then we will do some operations on it after that. So naming is very important. Make sure to check show classic on the filter. After you've done that, search for your activity, Excel application scope. You use those when you want to perform a lot of activities within a certain workbook. Even if not a lot, some activities within a certain scope. So remember, we named this old inventory file. So I'm saying open that file and do some things with it. So what I'm going to do now is the task I want to perform is to copy, if you like, the old report and move it into that new or incoming inventory report. So there's an activity called copy sheet. I bring that in. Now the name of the old inventory report was uh no, it's supposed to be September 2002, not October 2002. So the destination I wanted to go is incoming inventory file, right? I want you to copy the sheet September 2002 into um oh, right. This is correct. I'm saying no, it's not correct. It's September 2002, not October 2002. So this recording was kind of a mistake. Um so right, I think it's noteworthy that this should be called September 2002, right? And the idea is that you want to move the old report to the same place where the new report is, so it's going to be easier to compare. Not that it's not a huge deal, but it just kind of makes sense, especially for an audit trail sort of perspective. So I'm just if I had to do it manually, this is what I would do. I have to right click on September, change the workbook, and then move it into the other workbook manually. This does it without even opening the workbook at all. Um, so anyway, that's the task I want to do. Copy the old report into the new file and make sure you uncheck visible so that it doesn't need to actually literally open the Excel workbook. All right, so that's one activity. The next activity, I wanted to write in some new columns, right? One of them is, I'm basically going to tell the robot, write impairment, charge, or whatever, or impairment charge. Um, what's the status? In other words, the inventory level change. Did it remain unchanged? Did it reduce? Was there an increase? Was there a new purchase? That's what's going to be written in that status line. So if for example there was a decrease in inventory, to write it. If there was an increase, to write it. If there was nothing changed, to write like a little note there. And then the next thing is, okay, I want to verify, the that the calculation is correct. What price times quantity. I want to make sure. Just do manual computation, if you like, very quickly to make sure that what is in column M matches what is in column G. If it doesn't, I'll have to take column M as the more precedent or more correct answer, and so on and so forth. So I want to tell the robots, do that for me before I start performing the other computations. That's what I'm doing here. So we go back to the UiPath Studio, and this time we move in yet another Excel application, another sequence, just for the sake of organization. So it's a good practice to sort of like break them, into small components. Um, that's good for reusability. It's good for design purposes, and when there's an error in the project, you can easily corner it when you do things this way. You know, so again, good practice to name the activity properly. We are dragging in an Excel application scope, and I'm going to say access the new file or the new report, then do these things. I think I'm going to use what is called a write cell. Write cell. So you can see there are three of them. The green one is in modern experience. But what I want is the third one, because the second one will require you to put in the name of the workbook. The third one, we're already inside the workbook, so I don't need the workbook's name. The old one, different experience. The second one needs the workbook. You need to actually write out the name of the workbook before you say do something in it. But the Excel application scope we're working in makes that sort of redundant. So that's why I picked the third one. But if I wasn't using an Excel screen scope, then I would use the second one, because I can just tell it I'm referring to that workbook, write something somewhere in it, in a cell somewhere in it. Okay, so just to move along now, show you what it looks like, right? You can see that this one asked me for a workbook name before asking for which sheet do I want and which cell and what do I want to write. It's kind of redundant because I'm already inside an Excel application scope. So just showing you what it looks like. I'm removing it, and we're getting on to the task at hand. So again, remember I told you I want to write a few new columns, starting from column K. So KLM, NOP, Q. So I have different, operations I want to perform under these columns. So I'm essentially giving them a label or a column header, if you like. This is K1, right? It's pretty simple. If you know exactly where you want the content to go, you just that's the beauty of these activities. They are pre-configured, so you just give instructions. So I'm going to say I want it in K1, and what do I want to write in K1? I have to put it here. Just for information purposes, it only accepts string type of characters, string values, which will make sense to you as you go along. So I want to copy and paste that. I want to do something similar, only this time I don't want to I want to name the next column status. Because it's a string, it has to be in quotation marks. This is L1, and so on and so forth. So all the things all the column headers I want to like write, I'm asking it to do that now. So this will take a moment to quickly configure everything. So the next one is verify current inventory value, and we'll discuss all of that further as the project goes along. All right, the next column I want to write, or column header I want to write is, let me just paste them all. It's O1. So these are the things I want to write in N1 and O1. I want to write quantity 2 in N1. And quantity 2 is basically what was in the old report. I want to compare it to what's in this current report. But it'll start to make more sense to you as you move along. And these are the things I want to quickly write, the column headers. I've given the instructions. I want to say don't bother to open it, just write it behind the scenes. It's called write it in the background. All right, so that's one other activity. I'm going to move on to something else. You notice we're doing it step by step. First, we name the variables uh, that we're going to need to be calling on frequently. Then we say, okay, move the old report into the new report. And then when you've done that, on the new report, I want to add a few more columns. Is what we just finished doing. So I want to do something else now, one step after another, so that things are not bumping into each other. You kind of organize it that way. And the advantage of doing small pieces of automations like this is that, if you need them in other similar or related automations, you can just copy and paste them or publish them to a library that you can access from somewhere else. And, they call them a reusable content, components of projects. So if you find that this is something you use often, it's literally very easy to take that little piece and move it into a place where you can always access it, which doesn't feature in this particular automation, but it's very useful as a best practice. So now um, there are some things that need to be done before we can actually perform any automations. Hold on. So as we were saying, we're going to open another Excel application scope and basically define all the variables we'll be working with. In other words, everything in these columns, they have changing values. And in order to refer to them like very quickly, we have to sort of give each column like a name. So as like if I'm referring to purchase date, I want to call it a name. If I'm referring to SKU, I want to call it a name. And we're going to need, for the purposes of this demo, purchase date, SKU, quantity, price, inventory value. Those are the things we're going to need, in this business case. So I've asked it to refer to the incoming inventory file and then read read the contents. I'm going to use a read range, classic read range. I'm not going to use the green one because, like I said, that's a different approach. And the workbook one, I think we already reviewed earlier. It's not relevant here because we're in an Excel application scope. So now, what sheet am I asking you to read? I'm saying read October 2022. I'm going to replace that name. Then whatever you read, save it, read everything in that workbook. I'm going to delete that. Now whatever you find in there, call it this. I'm going to give it a name. Control K to set variable. I'm going to call it DT incoming inventory. Okay? Because it's going to read a data table out. And then out of that data table, it's basically going to read all of this stuff and store it in its memory. But the question is, what do I do with it? The other thing I'm going to ask you to do is inside that same workbook, there's another sheet called September 2022, which was the old inventory that we copied into that workbook. I just copied and pasted that, but I'm going to give it a name. DT old inventory, right? And the job is to basically compare the contents of these two worksheets and make some decisions. So the first thing we're going to do is say read those ranges, and then after you've done that, I'll tell you what to do with the information you get out. All right, so I'm pulling in a new sequence and I'm going to assign my variable names. In other words, I'm going to choose a name that I'm going to use to interact with the data I've just collected for each row or each column of it. I'm sorry. So in old inventory, although they're pretty much the same, I'm going to say anything in the first column. You notice I used an assign activity. So again, we're looking at purchase dates, SKU, quantity, price, inventory value. Those are the things that we're going to be interacting with mostly. So we're going to give each of them a name. And we're starting with the first one. So Control K to create a variable, and I'm going to call it purchase date, old, enter. And then I'm going to call it row 0 dot to string. Now I'm going to get an error because I have to put this inside a for each loop. If I don't want an error message, I have to say for each row inside a given data table, so that's the first one that pops up there. Oops. Yeah. And then I'm going to say for each row in this case, September to 2022 is older. And I'm starting with the older inventory list. So I'm going to say for each row in that workbook, and then if you remember, I read the contents of September 2022 and I said, store it into a data table called DT old inventory, right? Which you can see on the right. So I'm going to say for each row in that data table that you stored in your memory, right, do these things. And the first of it is assign a name, right? And you see the error will go away. So just for clarity, there are like what? Purchase date, SKU, description. The first, you count from 0. Yeah, let me just make it a little bit more visually appealing. You count 0, 1, 2, 3. That's how you do it. 4, 5. So if I wanted to refer to the items in the quantity row, that would be column 6 because I started counting from 0, right? So I'm telling you that the items in row 0 refer anything you see in that first column, call it purchase date old. That's what I'm saying with this command. If I wanted to refer to SKUs, I would say row 1 dot to string. If I wanted to refer to quantity, I would say row 6 dot to string. If I wanted to refer to price, I would say row 8 dot to string, you know, and to inventory row 9 dot to string, and so on and so forth. Okay. So I'm going to pretty much define the variables I'm going to be interacting with frequently before I actually start performing operations on them. So that's what we're doing at this point. I'm going to do another assign for each other column I'll be needing data from. So again, I'm going to call this one Control K to create a variable, SKUID, and enter. SKU underscore ID. Right? I'm giving that. I'm saying I need quantity next price, inventory value. I want to do the same thing for them. Okay, very quickly. So quantity old is what I'm going to call it. I'm going to control K to name the variable and press enter. Now I made a small operation here. If you notice, the first two are like row one dot to string, but I want this to be an actual number. So the command cint is an actual number that I see as 6, 20, 30, 10. So I want to be able to like perform operations with these numbers sort of in the computer's memory. So I'm going to say, convert whatever you find there into an integer. So that means that the variable type, I'm going to call it that quantity old. Yeah, the first thing I'm going to do is increase the scope of all of these variables to be the entire like project. So I can call them from anywhere in the project. Um, that's what I'm doing there. Now, that's important because if I don't do that, then it will only work inside this Excel application scope, and I may need them in other places. So the other thing is that I'm going to convert that quantity old to an integer 32 type of variable, and then I now use the command cint, and that will convert to integer row 6. Row 6 is your quantity. So when I do this, it realizes that okay, whatever comes out, whatever you read in here, or whatever you found there, converted to a number. That will be important later because when you want to like add, subtract, multiply, you can quickly do that in memory without a whole lot of drama. If you don't do that, it's going to come out as a string variable, as you see up there, and you can't just add string variables because it doesn't recognize that a string is a number. A string could be a text, a special character, anything. So it doesn't know for sure that it's a number unless you specify that it's a number, which is what we are doing right now. So again, the price is in row 8. Similar logic, increase the scope out of this place that it is. I'm sorry, change it to integer 32, and then increase the scope to the entire project. All right, so these are the variables we will be using very frequently in this project. At least we're also going to need um, the inventory value. Do the same thing. That was in row 9. Increase the scope to the entire project, change this to integer 32 variable type, and then the error goes away when you do that. So that's pretty much all the stuff you'll be needing repetitively from the old inventory workbook. And as we go on, we will be using that to perform operations, or using these variables to perform operations. Okay. All right, now that we've named them, um, we'll have to do the same thing for the other like inventory list. But this is just to remind you that you start counting from 0 when you're assigning from a data table. All right, so I'm gonna save, so kind of leave it as it was before. I don't need that because it was, probably that didn't come with the original report. I just typed that in there. So all right, we have to do the same thing for the next month. We've already read it into memory, but we haven't like assigned any variables we're going to use to perform operations. So we're going to quickly do the same thing. Pretty much a repetition of what we just done, but instead a new inventory list. or the incoming inventory list rather. So it's a similar logic. Row 0 dot to string, you give it a name. Row 1 dot to string, you give it a name after you identify which data table you are referring to. In this case, it's incoming DT incoming inventory. And then you essentially say, when you read that to your memory, I want to name all the contents of these, I want to assign names to the contents of these columns. So once you've done that, you can now start saying things like add this, subtract that, multiply that, compute that, or do this with that row. But first of all, you define all your variables. Again, purchase date, SKU, quantity, price, inventory value are the ones that we're going to need. And we're repeating pretty much the same thing we did just a few moments ago for the old inventory list. So in this case, we're going to name purchase date new. SKU, we're going to name it a little bit differently so you can differentiate between the old inventory list and the new one. So we're going to name the SKU ID new for the new inventory or incoming inventory. And likewise, the same thing, quantity new for new inventory quantity, price new for new inventory price. That's the price that came with the new inventory list. The value of the inventory was previously recorded. And we're quickly going to now go to the variable panel and increase the scope of all of this from body and change the number type variables to integers so the errors will go away. All right, now that we have the variables in place, the question is, what do we want to do with them? Now, as you may recall, the objective is to compare the old inventory list with the new inventory list and look for changes, and then do some operations with your findings. For example, if there's been a decrease in inventory, do something. If this is a new item that was not there before, do something, So we haven't actually done that, but we've defined that, okay, this is where you get your information from. Okay. So, I mean, there's a number of ways you could do this, but an SKU is sort of like a unique ID in a lot of cases that will help you differentiate between items. And that's a really important part of this, because you find that there are some items in the old list that are in the new list, and there are also items that were not in the old list that are in the new list, So they're all lumped together because, as you can see, the old list was 12 or 11 items, and this is like 24. So there are some new items there. So a human being would have had to do like a VLOOKUP, and then check for the differences and then perform whatever operations uh, uh, with their findings. Okay. But instead of that happening, we want this to be a fully automated exercise where you just click a button and the results you seek for are generated for you. All right. So that's like the objective of this. So we've created our variables. That's the old inventory list. I clicked on now, referring to this is the new one here. This is a new list because it's a little longer. So there are a few things to note. I'm going to ask it to delete that line because when you're doing a VLOOKUP, um, I mean you don't have to, but this is just my way of doing it. But I'm asking it to delete the it's going to create like a new sheet, delete the date, and then do an actual lookup using SKU, right? So I'm just going to sort of manually demonstrate what I'm looking for before I actually build the automation. But the idea is that whatever you're looking for, the subject of your VLOOKUP should typically be the first column. Okay, so just for the sake of to help visibility, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to perform the operation that I want to perform. Now, as I said, I wanted to remove the first column before it does its lookup, this purchase date column, because I want SKU to be the number one column in that particular work sheet. So DT incoming inventory is the one I want. So I'm saying remove with this command, remove the first that purchase data from there before you do anything. Okay. Then after you do that, I'm saying do a VLOOKUP. Make sure that show classic is checked, or you might not see this option. So this is a little bit tricky, but I'm saying the next thing after you do that is do a VLOOKUP and get something out of that for me. So I'm going to slowly explain it, but before I do, um, I guess it will make some sense to show you what I'm asking is to do manually, right? So I'm going to make a copy of the sheet. The robot is supposed to do all of this, but I'm doing it manually now. Moving the sheet one, the month one into month two, so they're both in the same workbook. And then I'm going to do like a VLOOKUP. This is mostly for uh, audit purposes. So if you ever need to check something, you see the old reports there before your final results. So I'm saying delete that line and then do a VLOOKUP of SKU in this data table, which I'm going to select, and return. After you look up return, what I want you to return is the quantity, which is 0. If you count the columns, quantity is column 6, and then comma false. So if you notice, quantity 1 is different from quantity 2, so there's been a change. And you have to do the same thing for everything. So this is what I would have had to do normally, like manually, um, as a person who had this assignment to do. But I'm going to automate the task this way. So I'm saying I'm going to give it which table to look for. Look inside old inventory data table. Which value do I want there? It's SKU ID that I want, right? So look for SKU ID in the old inventory list. That's B2 in this case, in the manual lookup. So I'm saying look for SKU ID inside the SKU column. And then what value do I want you to return if you find it? I want you to return the quantity column in the new inventory list, right? So that's what I want. Remember to put it in quotes. And then where should I put whatever I'm returning? Is where you put, or well, you have to give it a name. Whatever you find has a value. So this thing that comes back, where is it now? Yeah, this row here, this stuff that comes back, each of them is a unique value. So what do I call it? Because it changes depending on the row you're on. So what do I call that? I have to give it a name. So just call it return quantity. It's always nice to name your stuff um, something close to what it actually does. So I'll call it return quantity because I'm saying if you find the SKU on the other list, um, bring it back. Bring the quantity of whatever it is back so I can compare it to the new list. So I'm changing my mind here now about maybe I shouldn't name this SKU ID. I don't know that it's materially um, important, but I'm just going to call it, um, I'm going to name it differently. Okay, and what am I doing? I'm saying wherever the row is, wherever the column called SKU is, just handle it row by row, search for it row by row. Okay. And before this can work, it actually has to be inside a loop. Again, I'm increasing the scope so it's everywhere. The return quantity I asked it to bring back is a number. Well, it may or may not be a number. So we'll use something called generic value variable. Sorry, computer is a little slow. There are a lot of different, as you can see, there are a lot of literally hundreds of different kinds of variable types. And the more complicated, more advanced your skills, the more useful you find some of them. But we're looking for the UiPath core generic value. And that's basically kind of proprietary to UiPath. It's like, when you're not sure what's going to come out of a certain Excel intervention, just make it a generic core variable. And, that way you can later convert it to whatever type it actually is if it's not if when it becomes clear. Yeah. So I'm trying to figure out why I have an error message, as you see, but the reason why is because it's inside. It needs to be inside a loop for each loop. um, and I'm just going to put it back inside the loop, and you will notice that the error disappears. So, but what I replace that lookup value with is that, for each row in SK, just take one row at a time, right? Starting from SP7875 down the list, right? Look for that value in this new inventory workbook, right? Whatever you find, return it as return quantity in the quantity. I have to do an assigned value now. And what is this one for? So I'll explain it to you when I'm done. I have to go back a little. Um, I have to go back a little bit for you to see what to be able to visualize what I was trying to do. But I'm just gonna make sure everything is within scope, everything is fine. We have to make sure they're accessible from anywhere in the project. So yeah, at some point earlier in this sequence, I had named a new column quantity two. I don't know if you remember when I was asking, I built the automation for earlier on to write headers for certain columns, impairment charge, um, verified inventory value. So one of the columns I created was quantity two, QTY2. So I'm saying put that return city into QTY2 column. That's what I did with that assign. Now I'm just making a note to explain what the lookup table is for. I'm sorry, lookup data table command is for. And as we said before, it's to look up SKU in both old and new inventories lists, and if a match is found, write the answer in the column called quantity two. And the answer, what I mean by the answer is whatever is in the quantity column, put it in a new column, this return quantity called quantity two, right? So I'm taking you back to where I actually um, asked it to write some new columns. And you see here, I say write cell QTY2 in N1. So I'm essentially saying down here that return quantity should be written in QTY2 column as you find it in your lookup. So with that done, I've basically replicated the manual VLOOKUP that I just showed you then. So I have to put some conditions into it now. Okay, if you find it, do this. If you don't find it, do that. So if you don't find anything, then do something, right? So I'm saying in this case, if you don't find anything, when you compare the SKU columns in both sheets, just write 0 in quantity 2. If you do find something, then you have to do something else. So I'm going to need a write range command because I want it to write um, whatever it finds into our Excel report. Okay. So I want you to tack on its findings to the edge of the DT incoming inventory. That's the new inventory list. So that's old inventory. And this is new inventory, DT incoming inventory. So the answers, I've already said remove purchase date once you've read the range. So that means I need to make some adjustments, right? Because if I've removed one column, then everything will not be in the same position anymore. What it means is that SKU ID will probably be the first column. I'm sorry, it was the new inventory. I think I told you to remove um, the first column for. Let's just verify that. Yeah, so the way I did here, it won't even matter which position SKU is in. That's why I actually changed the so it's wherever you find SKU is where you should look. So it really won't matter. Then give me a return quantity if you find it. Yeah, that's the real reason why it's better to do it this way. So back to what we're doing. If you don't find anything, just write 0 in the column called quantity 2. If you do, then you gotta write something, and I'll tell you where to write it. When check invisible, I don't need you to be open while you're doing all of that. Just write some notes to make it easier, which is like good practice, or shall we say best practice. So what I've done here is um, I'm asking it to write range. Um, just checking to make sure everything's within scope. I'm going to need a delay command. So I'll just quickly put that in. 2 seconds. Another Excel application scope. Now I'm asking it to perform some operations on what it wrote down in that sheet one. Okay. Um, so what are the things I want done? At this time now it has done the VLOOKUP and whatever it has found, it has written it out inside the sheet called sheet one, just before the delay command up here. So now that I have that, comparison, I've checked, I've made a comparison between the two workbooks. What do I want to do next? And, it's pretty straightforward in the sense that, well, I want to, if inventory has reduced, write a note that says, you know, old is, sorry, new is less than old, that the inventory reduced or something like that. Um, and a few other things. So I might need, I might need to do some more signs, but first of all, let's even write out what we're trying to accomplish. So now this sheet one now is our findings from our VLOOKUP that is there. We're about to now process, in a sense, get out the results we're looking for. So yeah, the proper location is around N, and there'll be a few other things in between, a few columns in between there and there. But the idea is to compare column G to column N, and if there's a difference, write okay, there's a reduction. If there's an increase, write increase. If and so on and so forth. So I'm just trying to simulate what it will look like after it's done. So column K will contain impairment charge, column L will contain status, M will contain validated inventory value. And what that is it's going to do a hard computation to make sure price and quantity are correctly calculated. If there's a difference, then that's a reason to flag everything and do something. But one does not anticipate any difference, but it still will validate it anyway. So the idea is that if old is different from new, it might say something like inventory reduced. If it's the same, it will say inventory unchanged, you know, and so on and so forth, depending on, we'll make a quick comparison for all the rows and do that, right? So if it's a new product, it will write something like that, and so on and so forth. right? And then, if something has been in stock for more than a year, it will calculate an impairment charge. And then, like I said, it's going to do a hard competition of price times quantity to make sure that, it's correctly computed. So these are the things it will actually do for us. The automation will do all this for us. We don't have to do it manually. It starts to matter when you have like maybe 10,000 rows to check, and all of that becomes big. So if you spend more than a year and there's an impairment charge, if you spend more than a year in stock. So all of this stuff is what we now want to say do. But you have to actually write the commands. So we're going to have to do a few more assigns that are unique to this particular worksheet that we're working on. The first is we basically want to teach it how to count. So let me show you more clearly. Now this is relevant. We're saying inside DT updated inventory, right? I want you to make an index of rows. The reason why this is important is that you never know, like the one we're working with has 25 rows or 24 rows. But you could get your next one for next month could have 500 rows. You don't know how many rows are going to be there. So you need to set up a structure that, regardless of the number of rows that are there, um, you know, still perform the same operations. Whether you find 10 rows or 5,000 rows or 5 million rows, perform. So this index is the first step in making the robot flexible. Um, you're going to have to convert the variable type before this error will go away from string to integer 32, and of course increase the scope to be the whole project. So when you do that, my computer is kind of slow. Yeah. So when you do that, it forms like the foundation. Of course, this also needs to be in a for each loop, but I want you to look closely at the command. We're saying, okay, don't count the header, but whatever the number of rows there is in this Excel workbook, this is the index for counting it, right? And you'll see why it's useful a little later. So this has to be in a for each row, and you have to define the data table, which again we know is updated inventory. And then when you put that in, the error will go away because it needs to be in like for each value. So what else do we need? We need to assign a variable to now. I may be wrong. Uh, This seems to be like a duplicate, but I'll check that. I think I already named something different. Um, it will give me an error. Yeah, it is a duplicate name. So I have to give it another name to differentiate between variables. So I'll just rename it over here. What's the new one? Yeah. And of course I have to make it an integer because it's a real number. So convert it to an integer row 5, but that's be column 6 in our workbook. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. I want you to compare that row with column N. So I'm going to have to assign a variable to that column N as well. Then make a comparison. Same thing, except that this is a different column number. So it might be column 12 in this case, and then of course you have to do the same thing, expand the scope and change the type of variable to integer 32. So I'm counting just to validate that this is indeed is column 12. So in your actual finished result, remember we've deleted purchase date. So be careful with your count, because this is September 2002 sheet. We're dealing with sheet 1. I just wanted to show you one. So remember we've deleted this. I gave the command to delete that earlier. So whatever you're counting starts from SKU1 to, oops, sensitive, huh? 1, 2, 3. I have a happy mouse. All right, so we're counting. We're down at 12, right? So 12 is right, and 5 is right. Okay, so just naming. We haven't actually done anything yet, and of course defining the types of variables. So we're going to teach you that, okay, if you find that there's a difference to that, and then column N is going to be named stocking period. Why is that important? Because we want to compare the date an item. Basically, we want to validate. I guess the business rule is that if an item has been in stock for more than 1 year, there's an impairment charge that should be computed, right? So I have to make a variable that stores the computed difference, right? And whatever that period is, put it in column 13. All right. So these things are my variables. There's some others. Price will be column 7. Also make sure that that's converted to integer, and the scope. Oh, it looks like it's already a variable named price new. We change that. Then change the variable type, and then increase the scope to span the whole project. This is the value of the new inventory as we see it in our semi-final report. Do the same thing. You might need to change the name because it's a repetition. And then now we're going to create a new variable called validate value, and we're going to, it might be better for me to open this wide, but we're basically going to say, but first let me define what kind of variable it is and then increase the scope to make sure it spans the whole project. So right, this variable type is not going to be string because we're doing a calculation. Um, we're doing a calculation in the computer's brain, but I'll write that out first. And I'm essentially saying multiply price times quantity, really. Um, so I'm going to do that. Just to show you visually what it looks like. I'm saying, oh, it's already done here. But what it is, yeah, there you go. I'm saying do price times quantity, right? Then whatever you find, write it in column L. But I've done it like sort of manually here so you can visualize it. So I'm about to tell the robots to do that for me, is what I'm doing right now. So all of these columns, um, sorry, yeah. So it'll be more visually correct to say all this stuff will be on a new sheet called sheet 1 by the time we are all done. Okay. So anyway, how do you calculate price and quantity? Which is what we're about to teach the robots what to do. And at this point, you now begin to understand why we went through the trouble to convert all these things to integers from the get-go. Because now we don't have to write any real fancy programming. We'll just say, what, price new 2 star quantity new 1. Is the quantity old? It's new 1, yeah. That's the one we just named. Quantity new 1. That's what I want you to calculate, right? Very simple. It doesn't, it understands that there are two numbers because I already did that. I don't need to write any fancy programs. So write there in the memory to calculate it and write the answer in the relevant column. Is there anything else we need? Still need an assign. It's time for impairment charge. It's okay. And an impairment charge becomes valid when something has been in stock for more than a year. So it's like 1%, take 1% off, right? Now, that's the formula. Again, I performed it right there in the memory, but I have to change the variable type to something we haven't used before. In this case, it's going to be a double because there are it's just a variable type. There are decimal points in it. It's a float. Float is the expression for it. So system.double is going to understand that whatever comes out there should be a float. Don't know if I remember to increase the scope. No, I didn't. So increase the scope to make sure you can call it from anywhere in this process. And then, so we've validated the value of the inventory. We've calculated impairment charge if it exists. What else do we need? We need to write, some notes. Yeah, we've done quantity compare two quantities, right? And then if there's a difference, write a note under status, right? So for example, the first one was a little less, and so you write reduce. If it's a little more, or if it's new, you write new, that sort of thing. So this is the point where we start, telling it to do all those things. Um, so here we go. So right, if so now remember we're comparing the old quantity to the new quantity. So we're saying now if you find that old quantity is equal to the new quantity, then do something. Otherwise, do something else, right? And now that you've defined all the variables, it becomes a matter of just applying what you've learned. So I'm saying, okay, we find that um, old quantity is equal to new quantity, write inside column K that unchanged. Okay? I'm just making an adjustment so that it's easier to understand what's going on here in case you got lost. So again, yeah. Um, if old inventory is the same thing as new inventory quantity, you write stock unchanged, right? And if it's not, you do something different. This is the point where we're actually sort of like doing all of that stuff, right? So like in the first line, it shows stock reduced, because 15 is less than 20, and so on and so on. But again, the idea is that we don't have to do this manually. It's the robot that's going to do all of that. But it's just good for you to see what we're trying to accomplish before it actually happens. So this point where we are is where I'm teaching the robot how to actually do that. So I've said if old quantity is new quantity is equal to new quantity, then write stock unchanged in column K in whatever index you are currently looking at, whatever row that you're currently looking at. This is not the only way to do it, but this is one way to do it. So it's going to know that even if there are 15,000 rows on this document, it's going to do row by row. It's going to do that row by row very quickly. All right, but notice that formula. It says, the data table dot rows dot index of rows dot index of row plus 2, telling it, start counting after the header row. Okay, and count to whatever the end of that workbook is, whether it's 500, 50, 22. It'll know that it will stop writing stock unchanged in the relevant rows when it gets to the end of the workbook. All right, so this is it's just a typical example of an if then. So if on the other hand quantity old is not equal to quantity new, then there's something else you need to do, right? And I'm saying, you know, when you move to the then, compare old quantity to new quantity. If it is greater, right, then write stock reduced in K. And then in L, that computation that you made earlier to validate the value of inventory, write it there for that line, right? This one here, I said price times quantity. Let's do a manual computation of so that we can compare it. If there was some kind of error by the person who created the report, you catch it at this point. That's why this is there. All right. So it's just like an additional level of checking this. I don't know that it's needful, but if for any reason there was an error in the old report, you catch it there because it will be the same. Right. So I'm saying do those two things if the old quantity is greater than the new quantity. Right? I don't know if it's clear, but that's it. I said, if old is equal to new, write stock unchanged. On the other hand, we also need to add that validate value dot to string there too. So you also have to write that whether stock is changed or not changed. Right, before we move on to the second branch and do that, then on the else of the second branch, I also want to say, you know what, if the quantity of old is not greater than the quantity of new, that is not equal to, but it's not greater, then it can only mean that it wasn't there before, right? So if that be so, then make a note that it's a new inventory item. Um, so write that in column K and then do the same thing, validate value dot to string. So we're getting closer to the end of telling the robot what to do. At this point, it knows that, okay, compare old inventory to new inventory. And if you see a difference, write it out, write a comment about it, right? And then also verify that, the value of the inventory was properly calculated. It's been taught how to do all of that now. But there are other things like, okay, how long has this item been in stock? In Excel, you could easily I didn't even realize this until now because I had to write a fancy command to do the same thing in UiPath. But in Excel, if you subtract column L minus column A, you get the number of days, sort of by default. So that's one way to do it. But the idea is that if it's going to compare, it's going to calculate the number of days since when the item was bought till today. And then based on that, it's going to calculate an impairment charge. In other words, the idea is that if something has been in place for more than 1 year, it's subject to an impairment charge of say 1% of the value. All right, I want to sort of teach the robot how to calculate the difference between dates right here. So I'm going to quickly slip that in earlier on in the process. So I'm going to say read range. Each one will have a date. So I'm quickly saying whatever you find there, give it a name. Temporary dates data table incoming. and then I'm going to teach you how to calculate the difference between two dates, right? So I'm going to quickly have to name my variables. I'm going to call today's date date2. So whatever dates that this operation is taking place, you know, just show you what it looks like. Today dot to short date string is the command for um, displaying today's date. And then we have to give sort of, we have to identify which date are we comparing to today's date before we can use the formula, all right, to calculate the date. Right. So we're gonna have to, like, this is a for each row situation. It's gonna look through a list or like a data table, shall we say. So we're gonna quickly move this into that. So now that we've done that, we can now say, okay, I want to assign, whatever is in the first column. I think it was purchase date new. We're giving it a new name now because we want to use it just for the purpose of calculating or defining what the current date is, or the date of the product on the current row. So again, row 0, right? So for each date here, I want you to do today's date minus that and basically find me how many days have passed since the day this was purchased. Because I really don't know what's going to be in I'm changing it to a relevant sheet now, but I don't know what's going to be in the workbook. These things come to me by email. I don't know what's there. I just know that this is the structure of the workbook. So I'm going to create a variable called date difference value, and then this is the formula to use to compute the date. And in Excel, it's pretty simple. You just you click L minus that, and that'll give you the number of days. I didn't know that was that simple, but I'm working with data in memory, so I'm going to have to be very specific about the kind of data type I'm using. So this is what it looks like. This is the command dates diff, then date interval dot day, comma convert to date time, purchase date new one, which we just created, is the date on the Excel, and then convert it to date time, convert to date time date 2 to string. So if you write out this command, it's going to basically do the same thing. What is today's date? Subtract it from the date of the purchase and tell you how many days have transpired in between. Okay, that's what that's for. And then, that's just a command to say write line. But I'm going to have to tell it to actually write the answer somewhere, because what I've done here is just write it in my display panel here. So I've done that. I've gone through the trouble of teaching it how to compute the difference between dates at this point, so that we can use that information to calculate impairment charges. So we need to write an index similar to what we did below. basically telling you to start counting, because we don't always know exactly how many items are going to be on a data table. So because of that, we have to give the robot the ability to adjust to, if it gets an inventory report of 10 items, it will work with it. If it gets one of 10,000, it will work with it. All right. So this is the point where you say, okay, whatever Excel sheet you are reading, start counting the index of rows from after the header row. So quickly increase the scope of all these things to, well, the index is in TR32 type. No, that's not an integer. We have to increase the scope of all of these things to make sure that we can call them from anywhere within the project. All right. So we are now ready mostly to say, okay, calculate the difference between two dates, right? And write the answer out somewhere. Then when you write that answer out, based on that answer, we can calculate an impairment charge. All right. All right. So I'm essentially saying write the answer in column O under stock. Sorry, that is column N, right? Well, in this case, it'll be in column O because I've deleted like the first line, the first column. So I want it to end up in column O, right? So that's what I'm saying there. After you compare the difference between old date and new date, write the answer in column O in October 22 workbook, October 2 and 2002 worksheet, right? So you have to do all of this before we start doing any other thing. That's why I put it like higher up in the workbook. All right, so I'm gonna put it there so we can just label it as properly for readability and if necessary reusability. All right. So now that we've done that, this is the point where we actually use it. We're getting really close to finishing this now. I'm just checking to make sure everything is within scope. You want to make sure that everything is in the right place. All right, looks good. So I want to add something else to this. And that is basically saying if the stocking period is greater than 365 days, then write an impairment charge. I don't know if you remember that earlier we had shown that impairment charge is 0.01 of inventory value, right? So we're saying write that into column J if the stocking period happens to be more than 365 days. All right. So just making it more easier to follow by naming it properly. So now this is the place where I'm going to show you how the new Excel experience looks like. I want to do, just a little bit of formatting. So before you can use the new Excel style, you have to start it Excel style. You have to start it with Excel process scope, then drag in something called use Excel file, the activity, name the exact Excel file that you are trying to access. That needs to be clear. And then what I really want to do is if you notice when I type, it looks bluish, right? For whatever reason. So I'm wanting to like tell it that, reformat the results so that it appears black and nice. Right. So I'm telling it where to look. I've dragged in the format cells column, and I'm telling it to look in sheet one, sheet one, right? So it's a different experience. You could also use the old style to this. What I want is the font. I want you to make sure it's black, right? Right now it's blue. So set format, and then you click what you want, right? Um, then I believe that's all I need at this point. But as you can see, you can do a number of operations if you want. I just want that bluish thing that appears when it types to be converted to black so we can see it clearly. And don't know, is there anything else I want to do? Yeah, I want to auto fit ranges, basically spread out the columns so that you can read everything at one go. And I'm saying, okay, drag in that column. I'm selecting a source, which is excel.sheet one, same, and saying spread out all the columns wide enough so that you can read whatever is in the headers fully, if it's long. And that's it. And so that's all that remains to be done. So the only thing left to do now is run the report. So that's the old. I mean, it's run the robot. That's the old workbook. This is your new inventory report. And I'm just going to press play. And all of the stuff we've been doing since, once you've done it, it's a little bit easier to execute. But it takes a moment. These days, UiPath will check for errors first before it runs. And then you can see it in the left panel calculating number of days each item has been in inventory. Because we kind of told it to do that early in the process. And then, it just has that in memory somewhere. Then it's gonna go ahead and do all the stuff we said. I'm gonna try and open it to see. You see how it's writing in blue for whatever reason. That's why I needed to put that formatting at the end. So you just see it doing all this stuff, and really you don't have to, but this is just to show you what it's doing in the background. You could do it such that you just get the finished result as you please. But you can see it actually working now, doing all that stuff. Doesn't matter whether there are 10,000 items or 100,000 items, to do it very quickly. And there you go. That's it. It's all done. And from what I can see, this took less than I don't know, less than about 1 minute and 22 seconds. And that's it. So enjoy.